So today we're at the Land and Carbon. Land and Carbon Lab is an initiative of the WRI supported by generously by the Bezos Earth Fund. We're glad to have the Bezos Earth Fund here. We are monitoring all of the world's land, all its forests, grasslands, wetlands, croplands, urban areas, deserts, you name it, at 30 meter and now at 10 meter resolution in near real time. Today's session is about carbon, because we're layering in carbon data to all that Land and Carbon Lab. Yes, we're getting excited. So don't worry, there'll be things going on behind me as they get and fix this system here. It's part of this live action we're doing today with our session here. So, so today we're going to kick that off to really learn about. You're going to hear from Nancy Harris, one of our senior scientists who's leading the research from WRI and a bunch of our collaborators on this carbon data. But first, to get things all worked up here and get us really excited about the data that's going to come to see, I have two speakers in fact. First of all, Ani Dasgupta, CEO and President of the World Resources Institute. Let's give it up for Ani.
Thank you, Craig. And I'm so glad the technology is working because this is about a visual thing that you'll all see. So last COP in Glasgow, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. More? This is better? All right. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the feedback. The last COP was about what's called the Nature COP. 140 plus countries committed to end deforestation by 2030. This COP, for the first time, we have a food pavilion because the understanding of food systems has to change for us to get to 1.5. These things are happening simply because the science is absolutely clear that without protecting nature or enhancing nature, there is no 1.5 degree. You cannot get that. So this is why, so imagine if you had a tool that Craig just talked about, that you can actually measure it. So without measurement, there's no management. So if you could know if a tree is growing somewhere, and what kind of tree is it? What kind of crop pattern is it? Is the mangrove actually being protected? Or forest that is there or not there in a real time? This is the tool that you're going to hear about today. And this is the tool we're trying to develop with many. The reason this tool is possible even, for two reasons. One, geospatial data is better than ever. There are more satellites running around the Earth than ever. But data by itself doesn't do anything. The whole point is to make sure this data can help people make better decisions. This is where WRI comes in. This is all our work, is to bring data to a way that people and decision maker can make decisions. This is what we started with our most popular tool, which is our Global Forest Watch. This is like a, there you go, what timing. This is an evolution on steroids of Global Forest Watch. The second reason we can do this is partnership. No one organization can do something so vast, measuring every 10 square meters of Earth, the whole Earth, and everything green that's growing on it. We have vast partnership. I won't list all of them, but I just want to highlight, without partnership, we cannot be doing this. And we are very grateful to all the partners we have to build something like this, which takes time. And I want to introduce one of our partners. You will meet in a minute, Andrew Steers, President and CEO of Bezos Earth Fund. And the partnership we have with Andrew and his team is absolutely central to this. And I want to bring Andrew here to talk about how Bezos Earth Fund sees this. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Great. Well done, Annie. Thank you very much. So it'll take another 20 minutes to get this right. So they've asked me to extend my speech. It is fantastic to be here to support. The Bezos Earth Fund, as you may know, is a fund to be dispersed this decade for climate and nature. And among the very first cohort of grants 2 years ago, the Bezos Earth Fund provided $50 million to the Land and Carbon Lab. And the reason we did that is because we believe it's a game changer for the two reasons that Annie just mentioned. First, it brings the best science, the best AI, the best machine learning. Over time, it just becomes more and more accurate, not only for changing vegetation, for deforestation, for reforestation, but also for the carbon embedded in it. This is really a game-changing idea. And the second reason is what Annie just said, is that the way that this is being run by WRI and its partners is it's all about creating a sort of user-friendly interface that can make a difference. I'll just give you an example from our standpoint. By the way, Christian Sampe is here. Could you just stand up, Christian? Christian is our managing director overseeing our $3 billion commitment to nature. That's $1 billion for conservation, $1 billion to restoration, and $1 billion to food system transformation. And Christian came to us from, he was president of WCS, and now is overseeing all of this. And without something like the Land and Carbon Lab, we simply couldn't do our job. And if we couldn't do our job, then other philanthropies, other funders couldn't do their job. So we're putting a lot of resources into the conservation space. Just over the last year, we've done a lot. Every single one of those has GPS linked into Land and Carbon Lab. But the interesting thing this week now is that on last Monday, there was big announcements on landscape restoration. It's Africa's COP, so we were just one of those that put funds in. We put a $50 million commitment to landscape restoration in 3 countries, in Rwanda, in DRC, Kenya, and a little bit in Burundi as well. And now this is risky stuff. Why? Because hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of implementers will actually do the work. And it turns out that what we're going to do, we're going to be financing about 150 what we call aggregators. And they are either companies or NGOs or institutions. And what they would do is work with a whole group of maybe 1,000 farmers or community groups that do the work. We will need 1,000 shape files, which we will then insert, or WRI will insert, into Land and Carbon Lab. And we will be able to see, 3 years from today, whether or not restoration is actually happening. Not only whether the trees and the bushes are growing, but actually we'll be able to see what kind of species, I understand. And that will know, are we doing the right thing? Are we also helping the diversity of life? Now, there's a sort of secondary benefit, which is huge, which is, at the moment, about 80% of what we're doing on restoration is grants, 20% is very soft loans. Actually, the rates of return are huge, and over time, if we're going to expand to 100 million hectares by 2030, we need to bring private money in. That will only be possible if the private sector knows what's actually happening. So that's a secondary benefit. A tertiary benefit is, of course, that over time, we will have voluntary and who knows, maybe even regulated carbon markets that could finance this. That will not be possible, nor should it be possible, unless you know how much carbon is actually being sucked down from heaven through the magic of photosynthesis into trees and bushes and crops and soils. So thank you. What an honor it is to be here. Shall I keep going, or are we ready? We're ready. Okay. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the partnership with the Bezos Earth Fund. Now, folks, don't touch a thing when it comes to the cables. So I think we've now got it here. So now, to dive right into some of the latest and greatest data, it's my pleasure to bring up to the stage here Nancy Harris, Research Director of Global Forest Watch and the Land and Carbon Lab. Let's give it up for Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to hear more about scalable carbon monitoring solutions. And given the tech challenges, let's just dive right in. We talk a lot about making sure our carbon monitoring systems adhere to UNFCCC principles: transparency, completeness, consistency, comparability, and accuracy, the so-called TCCCA principles. What we don't talk enough about is what I'm calling over here on the right common sense principles. We need pragmatic monitoring systems that are cost-effective, scalable, timely, operational. So we need more efficient monitoring systems that can instill enough trust to get climate finance flowing without necessarily needing to monitor every last molecule of CO2 to the level of Schrodinger's cat. So we have a lot of stakeholders groups now who need this carbon monitoring information. It's always been and always has been relevant for national greenhouse gas inventory reporting, but now we also have companies who are looking to make net zero claims who need carbon monitoring information. We also have jurisdictions and project developers who are looking to sell their carbon credits on the markets. We also have project implementers who may not be looking to sell carbon credits, but they still need to report the carbon impacts of their project activities to their funders. So this morning, I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the work that Land and Carbon Lab is doing to facilitate scalability and efficiency of monitoring in the context of each of these 3 use cases. Starting with net zero companies, under the Science Based Targets Initiative, companies need to do 2 things related to land. They need to commit to ending deforestation in their supply chains, and they also need to set a target for reducing overall emissions, but also some companies that with significant land-related emissions also need to set a separate land-related emission reduction target called a flag target. And so we know that there are a lot of companies out there, especially in the food and beverage and forest product sectors, that continue to have deforestation in their supply chains. So Land and Carbon Lab is working with the Science Based Targets Network and the SBTI to create what we're calling a natural ecosystems base map. Looks exactly like this. It does not look like this. So you will see the real thing early next year, or at least a draft of it. And when you do, you will notice that it has both natural forests as well as other natural ecosystem types, like grasslands and wetlands. So we're creating this data set by putting the best global data available that we have. So starting with natural forests from Global Forest Watch. But as we push companies towards no conversion commitments, Land and Carbon Lab is also investing in improving global data sets on these other natural ecosystem types like grasslands and wetlands. Next. So on the grassland side, we are working with partners to map the extent of both intensively managed pasture lands as well as natural and semi-natural grasslands, looking at how those lands are changing over time with respect to various health and productivity metrics. And we're also mapping livestock numbers and associated methane emissions associated with those livestock herds. And as we build out this data, starting with natural forests and deforestation, we're putting all of this into an integrated reporting framework that is aligned with common definitions from the Accountability Framework Initiative. And we're putting the data into a platform called GFW Pro that is basically like GFW, but designed specifically for use by companies. So every company can use the same commonly aligned data set to track their no deforestation commitments. Next. So if we focus over here on the right, I mentioned that several companies are going to need to set a land-related emissions reduction target. And it turns out it's very hard to do that if you don't actually know what your land-related emissions are now, right? And it turns out that it's very hard. There's a lot of different ways to calculate land use change emissions depending on the level of traceability a company has into its supply chain. So ranging from the right, we have this ideal case where a company knows exactly where it's sourcing all of its products every single year. In that case, we can calculate emissions for those specific areas. But the reality is that many companies are not there yet, right? That is the goal. Full traceability is the goal, but many companies just aren't there. They can trace down to maybe a sourcing region or a subnational jurisdiction within a country, or maybe even just a country of origin or countries of origin. So again, next slide. Land and Carbon Lab is working with the SBTI and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to develop streamlined corporate emissions reporting analysis for both land use change emissions and eventually land management emissions, so that any company with wherever they are in their traceability journey can develop an estimate for land use change emissions. And then once they have that estimate, it's much easier to set a target, right, and track progress towards that target. Okay, so for companies, reducing emissions within their value chain has to be the priority, but there are also opportunities for mitigation outside the value chain. And companies can use carbon credits to counterbalance or neutralize any remaining emissions they have. And just to be clear, the SBTI net zero standard does allow currently the use of both avoided emissions credits from jurisdictional RED programs as well as removals credits. And in the hierarchy of nature-based solutions, we really want to protect forests first, right? And so that brings us to the previous slide of jurisdictional jurisdictions, both national and subnational, who are starting to generate these verified emission reduction credits. And in those cases, it's the jurisdictions themselves who are responsible for setting up the monitoring systems and getting those credits verified. But we still hear a strong demand for an independent source of information beyond what RED projects or eventually RED jurisdictions are reporting. And for that, a lot of people turn to our Global Forest Watch platform to look at tree cover loss statistics like you see here. And we get a lot of questions about how accurate are these statistics for a specific jurisdiction or region that we're interested in. And so, go ahead. We've had accuracy statistics for years at the global and biome scale, but we really can't tell you the accuracy of a specific area until we do sampling exercises like this. And now, thanks to Planet high-resolution imagery made possible from NICFI, that is what we are doing for specific key RED jurisdictions. We're doing these sampling exercises to understand what the accuracy is of the GFW data in specific jurisdictions. So here in Ucayali, Peru, we can say the overall accuracy of the GFW map is 98%. If you click one more, and we can look at the loss class having a roughly 20% rate of false positives and a 15% rate of false negatives. And we're doing this so that we can make GFW's data align with what are called good practice guidelines that have been set by the RED Plus community. And as we look at the pink pixels, we can also interpret those pink pixels in more detail to understand which of those lost pixels are true deforestation or a conversion to non-forest use versus degradation or other loss from natural disturbances that really have nothing to do with RED. And so from that interpretation, we can know that 77% of total tree cover loss in this area was deforestation. And we can calculate the area of that deforestation with an uncertainty bound around it. Again, this is required by good practice guidance. So if you go to the next slide, starting next year, we will be really putting these GFW statistics on our dashboard pages. And if you adjust the settings, you'll be able to compare deforestation rates against, next slide, sort of a reference period and a monitoring period that you can select. So we're doing all of these. I just want to emphasize that these sampling exercises are the exact opposite of scalable monitoring solutions. They are manual, they're very time consuming, and they can be fraught with error depending on who is doing the interpretation of the imagery. But this has become what the RED community requires. And so we're sort of testing whether we can demonstrate that maybe the map areas, maybe those are good enough. Maybe they fall within the uncertainty bounds of these sample-based assessments. And if that is the case, maybe we can go back to the calculating areas of a map that are much more aligned with our common sense principles of cost effectiveness, scalability, et cetera. At least for the jurisdictions where deforestation is the dominant driver. And so even if not, I know there's a lot of politics involved in what data we use, but even if not, this information should be relevant for verifiers as well as potentially corporate buyers who are interested in getting a sense of what the potential scale of real RED credits will be as they wait for the official verification reports to come out. Next. Okay, so this is my last segment, project developers and implementers. And I'm really going to focus here on restoration projects because on the next slide, we've seen a lot of commitments. We've seen commitments to restore 100 million hectares of deforested and degraded land by 2030. And about this time last year, WRI's Terra Fund for AFR 100 initiative funded 100 locally led restoration projects to try to figure out how to start delivering on these restoration commitments. So Terra Fund in blue, that gear in blue. So now, a year later, we have the white gear of our Terra Match platform that is monitoring the success of these 100 projects from various data collected on some jobs created, some community benefits. We're also monitoring satellite imagery of tree cover and tree count. And then up at the top gear, that gray gear, coming next year, we are co-creating what we're currently calling the Restoration Academy, which is going to connect a 5,000-strong, project-strong pipeline of restoration projects to the technical assistance they need so that they can get these projects going. So as we see these projects start to expand, we're really going to see these gears start to crank, right? And hopefully that leads to a lot of hundreds of millions of trees across, popping up across the landscape. So the question is, like, how are we going to monitor all of the carbon in those little projects? And so Land and Carbon Lab is partnering with David Skoll's team at Michigan State University, as well as several African partner organizations, to try to figure out how to develop a prototype system to monitor carbon across the landscape. Starting with 3 projects in Malawi. The bottom one there is the Eureka project. That is not actually a TerraFund project, but it is an AFR 100 project. And then the 2 TerraFund projects to the north, Wildlife Action Group and Wells for Zoe. So if we zoom into that bottom project area of Eureka, we can, with very, very high resolution imagery, as we go left to right, we can really start to see a lot of detail on that landscape, down to the level of individual tree crowns. And this is, next slide, this is what that landscape looks like on the ground. This is not a forest. This is what is referred to as trees outside forests. And when we start to talk about how we're going to measure the carbon, we really can't escape the fact that we need ground measurements. And the question is, how much ground data do we need? We cannot possibly monitor by hand with tape measures every single tree. And so the goal here is to collect this kind of data in a set of sites and then link that information to something that we can monitor more easily in remote sensing imagery. So the field measurements here that you see here, they were collected just a couple of weeks ago, and they're measuring things like tree crown diameter, diameter of breast height, tree height, things like that. Next. And so those same trees measured in those plots are also mapped from space in high-resolution satellite imagery. So 1-to-1, we have the trees numbered and labeled and mapped on the satellite image. So you all came here for scalable monitoring systems. This is where the scaling is happening, so pay attention to this. So we have these field measurements that we can develop these relationships from crown diameter on the horizontal axis versus stem diameter on the vertical axis. That's step 1. And then next, step 2, once we know that diameter of breast height, we can then link that to biomass both above ground and blue and below ground and red. And so then, just like that, once we can map tree crown diameters, we can also estimate the amount of carbon stored in each of those trees on the landscape, with the darker green showing more carbon in each tree. So next. So using those same relationships, then we can map all of the tree crowns in the project area. So all of those little black dots that look like ants marching all over the map, those are the tree crowns that were delineated in the satellite imagery. And so we can calculate the carbon at whatever size pixel we want. And so now we know that about 150,000 metric tons of carbon are stored across about 50,000 hectares of this Eureka project area. We now have a baseline. And so we can also use the same relationships I showed to estimate carbon in those other areas. So if we look at the Wildlife Action Group, next we have a project boundary on the left, and then we also have an estimate of the tree crowns in that project area and how much carbon they're storing. So now we're working with our partners to collect more data across more countries and more trees, so that we can really, any project that comes into this TerraMatch platform, we can develop an estimate of a baseline carbon stock, and then also monitor how those stocks are changing over time as the trees start to grow. So three key takeaways here. One is monitoring is absolutely key to unlocking climate finance at scale for nature-based solutions. And I hope that I've demonstrated that more timely, efficient, and scalable monitoring solutions are emerging, thanks to improvements in data and advances in technology, and new research partnerships that are forming because we have support from the Bezos Earth Fund. And then this third point, this is sort of my personal spin on this. I have a microphone, so I'm going to use it. Nature is variable, and that's a very good thing, right? We cannot wait for our carbon monitoring systems to achieve 100% accuracy. One, that's not actually even possible. And two, that's not what we want. We want nature, we want diversity, right? We want diversity in nature. That is what allows nature to adapt and change. And so with that diversity comes variability. With that variability comes measurement uncertainty. So you know what has a really low uncertainty? A monoculture tree plantation. That's not what we want, right? So if we are really going to incentivize real nature-based solutions, we really need to accommodate that level of variability, particularly in the tropical forests, and really just accommodate that rather than trying to fit all of nature into these statistical constructs of uncertainty that really have not helped get climate finance flowing into the forest that we want to maintain and restore. We want resilience, we want diversity. So I'll get down off my soapbox now.
Wow, that's all I can say. I'm sure glad we actually had the screen for those images, right? It's just amazing to see. That'd be hard to describe verbally. So I'm glad. Thank you, AV folks, for finally coming through here. That's pretty impressive. You can see the individual tree crowns, and now we know exactly how much carbon. And once you get that figured out, you can scale it up, right? That's what we're working towards here. So the next part of our session here is I'm going to call up six speakers. These speakers actually have an exam question, so I hope they're paying attention. I forewarned you, right? There's one exam question. That is, given what you do, how could this information that Nancy just talked about help you out, to help advance your cause, okay? So that's the question. Given what you just saw, how can this help advance what you're working on? And thank you, folks, for setting this up here so the cameras, the live stream can catch us all. Please come up to the stage. Steve Zwick, Senior Manager for Media Relations at Vera. Rosalind Fasua Ajay from Art Trees, and as well as the Ghana representative of the Fact Dialogue. Jamie Mulligan, Head of Carbon Neutralization Science and Strategy at Amazon. Sam Kanyamibwa, the founder and CEO of Arcos in Rwanda. Mamadou Jikite from African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. And Marcelo Furtado, President, Board of Trustees of DBRI Brazil and Principal at Nature Finance. Thank you all. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the panel. You know your exam question. I'm going to pass the mic down. If we keep it to 2 minutes or less, then we have great time for a lot of Q&A. So I'd love to hear from you. You know the order now. You can see the order. So here we go. So you don't have much time to think about it, but you're going first. Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in terms of what it can do, how this can help what Vera does, anything that provides this kind of granularity and this kind of available data is obviously very important. I think there's a misconception out there that that the carbon standards are just now catching up to the technology. It's actually the technology that's catching up to what we do. As we just saw in the presentation, ground truthing is still really, really necessary. So I think how this fits into, and we're actually feeding into this, as I understand, one phase of this is that we will be able to take Vera projects and feed into this so that people can actually look and see what's happening in our projects in near real time, which has always been kind of a problem we had with Global Forest Watch, where people would want to see what's happening in a Vera project. They look at Global Forest Watch and they're like, this doesn't match up. And then WRI would have to answer that. We'd have to answer that. This eliminates that. And it also feeds into our whole digitization process. We are in the process of completely digitizing everything we do. We've already begun to digitize the project review process. And we've got a working group on how to digitize the entire project development process. And that is really hairy because there are so many different approaches, so many different ways of analyze. There's like these. We're seeing technologies popping up, like right and left, with slightly different approaches, using artificial intelligence to analyze what's happening on the ground. The AI guys don't want to show their algorithms. We've got to find a way to be able to see what they're doing, verify them crosswise, and then ensure that it goes forward in a way that's structured and standardized. And I think an initiative like this just helps get everybody on the same page. It's you guys have the eyes of the world, we have the eyes of our project developers, and I do see this as something that can just become like a focal point for a lot of the different initiatives, us, Art Trees, what everybody else is doing.
Before I was at Amazon, I was actually at WRI, and I remember trying to fundraise for an early version of this, so kudos to the Bezos Earth Fund for making this happen. In my role at Amazon, I focus on beyond value chain mitigation, so I'll focus my comments there. Although clearly this has value for companies working on supply chain decarbonization as well, both traceability but also at a jurisdictional scale, which I expect will become more common in that space. This has real value for two major elements of my strategy and beyond value chain mitigation. The first being we really are seeking to catalyze a massive reduction in deforestation in the coming decade. Amazon was a co-funder of the Leaf Coalition, and as a buyer, as one of the larger buyers in the Leaf Coalition, my small team and I have to figure out where to put our funds, which jurisdictions to bet on, if you will. We really need to have a solid understanding of trends in deforestation and with the kinds of metrics that line up with how the carbon credits are generated. And then once we've placed those bets, I mean, companies in the Leaf Coalition are signing advanced purchase contracts. We're committing millions of dollars. If the jurisdictions do reduce deforestation and deliver those credits, we are legally bound to purchase them. And so I need to be able to track stuff. And my finance team will be asking me, okay, we've signed this agreement with this state in this part of the tropics. What's happening? Are we expecting to have to pay? When is that going to happen? And without something like this, you got to wait for the crediting year to go by, and then you've got to wait for the verifiers to do their work, which is very thorough and appropriately so. It takes a lot of time. So it's not really tenable for us to be sitting around for 12, 18 months without realizing whether or not we're going to have a multi-million dollar expense come through the pipeline. So having earlier intelligence on whether the work that we're doing both through the Leaf Coalition and in conjunction with the Leaf Coalition is working, and being able to plan our finances accordingly is really important. If it's not working in a particular jurisdiction, we need to know that so we can reallocate our funds somewhere where it is going to work, and we can work in a more real time. We need to learn very quickly from these efforts so we can adapt. So I think this is critical. One thing for the team to watch out for, I think, of course, is when you have two sources of truth and they disagree with each other, what's happening. And in some cases, there's a lot of noise in these systems, and it would be simply, you're somewhere else within the error bars, you're within the margin of error. Actually, statistically, the numbers are the same, but to a journalist, they might look very different. And so I think there's a duty of care to really scrub in where there is disagreement between Land and Carbon Lab's numbers and what the official numbers from the jurisdiction are saying. So that'll be important to stay on top of. Now, the other element of my strategy, and I'm probably going on, so I'll shut up, is tree-based restoration. And I think the carbon market is going to be major segment of the carbon market will be jurisdictional red for the next decade and beyond. When that phases out, by 2040, I expect the carbon market, the largest segment of the carbon market will be from tree-based restoration, nature-based carbon removal. And just hundreds of millions of hectares of formerly forested pasture. The opportunity is immense. You can tackle it in ways that are consistent with food security. But you're talking about working across very different ecosystems, millions and millions of landholders. I was in Brazil on our project. I saw one farmer under the same program planted cocoa agroforestry. Farmer 2, same program, cocoa agroforestry. The systems were night and day, completely different. One farmer had mastered his craft, was using a little more fertilizer up front, higher density of shade trees. The carbon numbers are very different. And so we need to get a handle on that. And this is real friction. This is transaction costs from a carbon market standpoint in scaling these systems. Certainly the farmers shouldn't have to worry about counting carbon in their field. So we have to have streamlined, scalable mechanisms for doing this. I think the team's on the right track. I would agree with Nancy that you don't need precision in these systems. You need the absence of bias. But on average, at scale, we need to be getting the numbers right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Nancy, for that wonderful presentation. I guess my first question is to Andrew, because I didn't hear Ghana mentioned in the countries that you're supporting. And I think that Ghana should be in there. So that's my first question to Andrew. Anyway. So thank you. That's great stuff. For the work that we are doing in Ghana, we are working with farmers on mosaic landscapes. So you have farms, you have forests interspersed, and we have also a lot of private sector presence. I believe that this would be absolutely fantastic for private sector because for some time now, apart from their global deforestation targets, they have been wanting to get into the whole carbon attribution. But you need to know what is happening at a very small farm scale. So if we can get into the trees, being able to detect with such high resolution data, it is amazing. As part of our Red Plus process, we've been able to issue our very first credits. I was telling Andrew earlier, and it's within a jurisdictional program. So we have benefits going to local communities who are farmers, either for farming inputs or also for community development projects, and also some amount getting into law enforcement. I guess my 3 questions are, it's not just about trees, it's also about forests. So in Ghana, we are talking more about forest cover, not tree cover, because we have a forest definition. So it will be good to understand how this then begins to map out forests instead of just trees, because we do not, for example, want to create a perverse incentive for some areas. We do not classify cashew now as part of our forest definition. So if we have farmers wanting to get into cashew, if we have technology that is detecting trees, is it able to then get into detecting forest cover, not just tree cover? And I guess my second question there is also into the diversity of species, because you have different species that get into different quantifications of carbon. So what does the technology also do on that? And thirdly, about standards. So for example, now we are working with a carbon fund. It's the Carbon Fund Met framework. We've also signed on to LEAF, and that we are going to use trees as a standard. How does technology help us to get into satisfying the different standard requirements, because they are not the same and they all come up with different requirements. Ultimately, I know it is based on the national or country specific MRV system, but it has some nuances in there that every standard has some requirements that we need to respond to. And I guess lastly, what I would say is not really a question, but in terms of performance, I guess this will be good once we have it refined to suit national circumstances, because for Ghana, we are now into a resource-based payment phase. If you are a farmer, it's not just enough that you're a cocoa farmer. We need to understand that you are applying the right climate-smart cocoa practices and also applying the right social and environmental safeguards principles. So we are doing nitty-gritty performance tracking. The whole landscape has generated emission reductions, but you need to get into where it is actually coming from intervention areas. So this will be good for us in tracking that performance, we believe, and if we're able to sort out the other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think today is a celebration, actually. Thank you, Nancy, for the presentation, and to hear that we have a tool for monitoring, and at the same time we have a Bezos Earth Fund with the funds. For me, who is in the field, it is a big celebration. The monitoring has different benefits for someone who is in the field. A few months ago in June, I come from Rwanda, and King Charles, who was then Prince Charles, visited our project on the ground. And one of the questions we had was to show how the site was before. So we had to go back. Luckily, we found some photos how the site was 6 years ago. In fact, when you're implementing, you are dealing with everyday activity. You don't even realize what is changing. So we were quite fascinated to see how the site was before and how it is today. So in this era, we are in a changing, very fast changing world, and we have to be accountable quite regularly. So the tool we have today is going to help us actually to achieve that. We are, at the moment, my organization, ARCOS, we are working in Rwanda and surrounding countries on over 20,000 hectares with staff on the ground. And when it comes to monitoring, it's quite a tough job. So if we have a tool which can relate to what is observed at large scale and what we are collecting at local, at site level, it is very good because, you know, when you are talking monitoring, it's about also reporting, it's also verification. It can also help not only decision making, but also going back to our communities. If you have visual product, like what you see, and you are able to show to the community, by the way, these are the trees. We are able now to see the trees with you. We are now even able to count how much carbon with you, and we see what is happening. So this is good for us, for our communities, even for the country, because our countries in Africa have committed under Bono challenge to a number of hectares. So as you saw, the tool is going to help to know how much hectare, how many trees, even the jobs. So all of this is going to help us really to align to the government targets and be reporting and be communicating our contribution to national agenda. Thank you.
Okay, we lost the screen. I hope we don't lose the microphone, right? So, good morning. My name is Marcelo Furtado. My day job is at Nature Finance, and my evening job is at WRI Brazil Board. So let me start, Craig, first by congratulating you and the team for such a great initiative. And from a WRI Brazil perspective, my answer would be, we are already committed to using this tool on restoration projects in Espírito Santo with native species. So I think this is a groundbreaking approach to actually use the tool, apply it to a subnational jurisdiction with a technique of restoration to also make native species a more valuable. And we're expanding this to Mato Grosso and Pará state. So what that means is we are ready to already take the tool, put it on the ground, and create real cases to demonstrate its application. Now, with my day job at Nature Finance, I think it would be important to set expectation and say there are three important learnings we're getting from week 1 of COP27. The first one is finance is the issue. And if you're looking at finance only and always from a public fund, we have bad news, right? All countries are broken. But the good news is there's a lot of money out there in the market, and we're not shifting markets to nature positive, climate positive, and equitable solutions. And we're not doing that because we're not looking at market change. We're just creating new products and asking the financial sector, come and invest. And that's just not going to happen. And I think the tool, Craig, that you and Nancy demonstrated here helps us move from how to actually shift markets. Now, having said that, we normally like to look for new stuff. So we come with, you know, what about this new nature-based credits market and so on. But there are some old markets that are really big and really full of money. Why we're talking about in the nature credits, carbon credit space of a couple $100 billion, there is one market alone that is a $4 trillion market per year. It means the third largest economy, China, US, and agricultural commodities. So if we have already markets that are happening today and we could shift them towards nature positive and equitable, how are we going to do that? And that comes then, Nancy, a provocation for me as a suggestion for how we look into the next phase of this, which is looking beyond carbon to nature credits. What if we add to carbon biodiversity, water, ecosystem services, using the same approach, but measuring beyond carbon? And I think that looking into the future not only allows us to new places to apply the tool, but expanding the tool itself to make credits more valuable. The other element that I think it's a suggestion for us to consider is many of my fellow panelists here are making either questions or remarks on the land Carbon Lab that are not MRV related. It's actually governance related. And by not addressing that governance issue, we're bringing it as if it were a tool issue, and it's not. And we're not going to fix it at this level. We're going to have to address this as a governance level. And I think that we're doing as society, and that I'm saying civil society, companies and governments, we're not doing a good job addressing governance issues. So we could have this credit well-defined, well-applied, well-measured, and when you transact the credit, the money will not get down to the community level. And that will only happen if we have the governance issues. Even the question of it is a tree or a forest approach is a governance. It's not a standard problem, it's a governance problem because we could define those standards. So I think these issues can be resolved, and I will end by seconding Nancy's last remark on changing the narrative. The financial sector loves to say dealing with nature is too complicated. Sorry. Whenever you guys get the right statistics, the right numbers, then come talk to us. Yet, when they had to create subprime or hyper trading, they had no problem coming up with very complex stuff that actually nobody understands, and whoever understands can never explain it. So here we are having a fabulous demonstration of something that is very, very ground-based on science and evidence. And yet the financial sector often says, well, it's not ready yet to be investable. So the problem with that is ourselves. We need to change the narrative. We need to start talking about nature as an investable opportunity, which does not mean that all nature and any nature is available for monetization. With good governance, we will select what is possible and what is not, engaging all the key stakeholders. So congratulations, and I think that the MRV piece is solved. Thank you, Nancy. Now let's get to work on making this happen.
What a speech. Well done. My name is Mamadou Diakite, working for the African Union Development Agencies and manager of the Africa Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative AFR 100 that Nancy mentioned. I was in Glasgow at the launch of the Land and Carbon Initiative. And I have the impression, we always say that the UNFC process, climate change, is very slow. But in our restoration movement, I really have the impression that we are doing big leapfrogs. From Glasgow to here, we were just launching this initiative and others. And I can tell you that between Glasgow and now, I can at least count for $2 billion that was mobilized for the AFR 100 initiative. And why? Monitoring was one of the biggest challenges. When we started AFR 100 in Paris, 2015, in the same setting, COP21, for 2-3 years we were being told, get your act right, bring us figures, data, monitoring that is solid. And in the last 5-7 years, this is what we were working on. And you see that with this kind of initiatives, and it might look big, but there are many other initiatives under AFR 100 to monitor restoration. And another very satisfying impression as an African I have is that in the restoration agenda movement, it looks like that Africa is in the forefront. Africa is the developed nation in restoration. That we are really showing through the partnership we are building. The AFR 100 has 32 countries that have joined. And this afternoon, I have a country minister like Somalia. Those countries that were isolated for a long time, they say they want to join AFR 100. So next time you hear Somalia, you see that they have joined AFR 100. And this is the kind of traction we are having in Africa and in the world. Why? Because we are doing solid monitoring, step by step. Monitoring for us is building credibility. We are building credibility on a daily basis. We don't believe in only speeches, talks, but we want to work on data and on real figures that can be shown to investors and to our countries. Actually, we have a dual credibility challenge. In one hand, for the investors, like Bezos Fund, like Climate Asset Management, like others, but also to our own governments. And you can see, and this is another very big pride that we have, that African governments, countries are investing in land restoration. You go check Malawi, you go check Rwanda, you go check Nigeria, you go check Niger. They are investing part of their national budget into restoration. And that is why I say in restoration, Africa is our African countries, Africa as a whole is in front, and we are the developed nations of restoration. And now we are talking about Bezos Fund, but you can see the Global Evergreening Alliance mobilized more than $300 million based on the solid monitoring systems. So in AFA 100, we have those 4 pillars, mobilizing countries first, because it is a country-led initiative. It is not from outside. We have a lot of support from outside, but 32 countries have joined so far. We have a solid resource mobilization. And I mentioned these 2 billion, and among those 2 billion, Bezos Fund announced the 50 million in Kenya, Malawi, Rwanda, and DRC. And we try also to aggregate the knowledge to package it in a way that we can go for advocacy for other countries, other partners, investors to join. And now the monitoring is really taking a very strong core role in the AFA 100. And that's why I thank you very much again for this invitation.
Great. Well, thank you, all 6 panelists here, for your insights on how the monitoring can help you advance your agenda. We are actually at time, we're actually beyond time right now, but I want to let you know that all the panelists and Nancy will be up here to take individual questions if you have them. So we still have this space for another 30 minutes or so, but I know some of you have to run to somewhere else, but we have the space, so please come up and ask questions. I'm going to bring Nancy back up again. Let's give a round of applause on behalf of all the Land and Carbon Lab team here, all the great work here. It's pretty exciting stuff. I will say the word to me was wow, just seeing all the great stuff coming down here. So with that, applause for all our panelists. Thank you all. I know I leave here with a little bit of a hope. This is the beginning of week 2. I leave here with a bit of hope, right? I just got off the plane, so maybe this is the lack of sleep, but I just hearing the energy in Mamadou's voice. You know, Africa is a developed country when it comes to restoration. What a great line. You got to trademark that one, right? Marcello talking about the very real point that it's governance as well. And this monitoring can actually help with governance, right? The best form of governance is sunlight, having stuff be seen, right? This is something that can really help with governance, right? Hearing from the others on this panel about finance and money getting ready to flow into this, the carbon crediting system getting ready for this, and now we have the science starting to come to play, because at the end of the day, it's about getting what gets managed, what gets monitored gets managed, right? And that's fundamentally what this is about. So I want to thank you all for all the work. I see a lot of partners here in the room that we work with on a lot of projects here. Thank you for the work that you all do here. Keep it going. We're going to be with you all the way to the end. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.